So let me tell you a little bit about my life story. This is the story of my grandmother, Lena Ponsky. She's the one closest to me on your left. So this goes back a number of years. Now, my grandmother, Lena Ponsky, had always been very, very independent. Everybody loved her. She was active in all kinds of civic organizations. She was a leader. Everybody was inspired by her presence. And she was extremely independent. Even though she never learned how to drive, she would either walk or take the buses everywhere. To give you an idea how independent she was, I think she was probably in her mid-80s. And it turned out that, as we later discovered, she needed some dental surgery. Well, instead of mentioning it to any of us in the family, who would have been very happy to take her to the dentist, guess what she did? She hopped on a bus, as she always did, took herself to the dentist, had 4 teeth extracted, and took the bus home, holding a cold compress to her cheek to control the bleeding. And we only learned about that, the rest of the family, when she called that evening to report the events of the day. I mean, that gives you an idea of my grandmother. Well, as she became, I would say, about 89 and a half, 90, that range, we slowly noticed that she was slowing down, that she was not quite the person that she was. The apartment wasn't being kept as neat and tidy as it had been. She didn't appear to be getting good nutrition. As we later learned, her eyesight was failing. And this was, we couldn't believe it. This was our grandmother. And it had always been the pillar of strength and kindness. Well, as a family, we kind of stepped in. We began to see what we could do for her. First, we found, I say we, not just me, but my parents, my aunt, the extended family, ultimately found assisted living for her, and then later it morphed into a nursing facility. And as we began to look after my grandmother, we were asking questions, the same kinds of questions that we're going to talk about today. How do we get good care? How do we protect her finances? How do we pay for the finances? How do we make her assets last? What about her will, her trust? All these questions. And very few people had the answer. We had to look far and wide for very limited information. And suddenly, up until then, I, with many of my attorney colleagues, had been doing wills, doing trusts, planning for people's death. And I always felt that something was missing, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it until we got involved with a situation involving my grandmother. And suddenly, a light bulb went on. And here's what it was. Instead of planning for death, the question was not what happens when I die. The question was, what happens if I don't die, but I need long-term care? And immediately my focus was born. And this probably goes back 15 to 18 years. And I've been practicing elder law ever since. And I hope to do it many years in the future. And the reason I asked this young lady in the back to stand up, because she is indeed a very special guest. She is the eldest daughter of my grandmother, also happens to be my mother, the lady waving in the back. And that's my story. That's how I got started.